Hey, what's up, guys? This is Nate from Black Gold Trading. I am the lead full-time day trader here at Black Gold, and today I want to do a trade review. As you may know, reviewing your trades is one of the most important things to do, especially when there are losses. And so today I want to review with you one of the trades that one of our community members inside of our live trading Discord sent to us. If you want to join our free Discord, I'm going to put the link right here where you can join. There's a link here, and there's going to be a link down below, where if you want to join our Discord and be able to see our indicator, our wins, and what we're doing inside of our community when it comes to futures trading, make sure you click that link. Let's go ahead and let's dive into the trade review. All right, so this was a trade that was taken on micro gold futures on the 5-minute. Looks like it was taken just before the market open here at a little after 8 o'clock. And so what the community member was looking for was he was looking for a back test of 34.24 based upon supply and demand. That is how I teach. That is one of the ways that I teach inside of our community, besides using our indicator, which using those two hand in hand work out really well. But he saw that on the third, right? On the third, that we had already had one back test. So he was looking for a second back test off of 34.24. And what he wanted to know is why this failed, and was he reading what I guess wrong was he reading inside of the charts? Was there something that he missed? Was there something that maybe made more sense, or is it something where he just read the chart wrong and wasn't able to properly read the charts? And so here's where the trade took place. And so he had a pretty tight stop on this trade. So if we zoom in here just a little bit, we can see where the trade took place, actually right here. So he took a sell just above 34.24. Attempting to get the reclaim of 34.24 to the downside, but the price ended up reversing and coming back up. So let's talk really quickly about supply and demand and why this trade likely failed. All right, now let's take a look at trading view here, and let's take a look at gold over the longer term so we can kind of start to evaluate, well, why did this trade fail? So number one, here's where the actual trade took place, right? And so he was in a sell here, likely looking for the recapture of 34.24, attempting for a failed breakout to get down to the downside. All right, so number one, let's take a look over gold at the long term. When you're trading supply and demand, you always have to start off at the long term to kind of start to make your assessment of the overall market. I know my charts look a little bit crazy. I have all these lines on here, but I promise this all makes sense if you learn this style of trading. All right, so let's look here at the fourth for this move up. All right, but first, let's start to see if there's any supply and demand zones here. All right, so I'm looking right now at the 45-minute. All right, so there's a couple of categorizations around supply and demand zones. All right, number one, we're looking for clean basing, and number two, we're looking for speed of exit. All right, so on the fourth right here, all right, is where he was looking to take the sell. All right, he had seen a couple of back tests historically. Now, let's look at the basing here. I mean, if we're looking on the 45-minute, we kind of have some basing down here, all right, for a demand zone. But one thing that really stands out to me is look at all of this volume here, right? Now, in terms of the 45-minute, which is still kind of a lower time frame, right, there's really not too much clean basing, all right? Even if we look over at the higher time frames on like a 4-hour or even like a daily chart, again, not much in terms of clean basing here. Let's go down to a 30-minute and let's see what kind of basing structure we have. Again, even right here around this piece of volume here, not much clean basing. We have big wicks up and down. We do have a pretty quick exit out of here, all right, with the failure of this low. But, you know, again, that's pretty much the only thing we have going for us when it comes to supply and demand zones. Now, one thing to keep in mind is, again, looking at the long term here, one thing that gold has done is it has recovered a major previous low, right? So if we look way over here, right, we recovered a major previous low down here at 63.62 to 63 or to 33.66. And so what that likely tells us is, number one, since we've recovered a major low, whereas gold was in a major downtrend, all right, where we had this big, huge pour down right here on gold, all right, we then reversed by recovering a major low at 33.62 to 66. And that major low has given us the squeeze that we are seeing in the continuation of the squeeze, right? So number one, gold is pretty bullish when you look at it, right? It's not looking super bearish. All right, so it's looking bullish. So buys already had a higher probability than sells in and of themselves. All right, so then when it comes down to the actual structure itself, again, a little bit of basing, forming a demand zone down here at the lows. And then let's take a look at the shorter time frame so we can actually start to paint out the structure here that we were looking at on the 4th. Let's go back to the 4th. All right, so a couple of things. Again, 34.24 was a key previous high over here. Let's take a look, I believe. No, it was actually a key previous low. All right, that had originally had some support. All right, so it's a white line, and the reason that I paint them white is basically just to show that they are minor levels. They are not major levels, so they probably don't hold a ton of weight in the shorter term. All right, but let's take a look back here again. All right, so on the 3rd, here in what looks like to be the overnight session, I believe we had our first test up here to 34.24. All right, and then we had price come down. We had price, we had a drop, a slow squeeze / base, and then another drop. All right, so this was already starting to get a little bit weaker, and we didn't really have much of an elevator down. We still came down here to a previous low. All right, we did not form a new low. All right, or we, in terms of a lower low, we did form a new low, but not a lower low. All right, so bullish sign number 2 that gold is wanting to make a move up. All right, not only was this squeeze down here a pretty good sign of gold wanting to move up. All right, but now as we start to build a basing structure, all right, we're starting to form higher lows. All right, so there's number 1. And then at number 2, we can see here, obviously, if we were looking on the day, all right, we had a second back test up here to 34.24. All right, so now 34.24 has been back tested twice. All right, so the way that I view it is every time there's a back test, the probability is increasing for it to break through and decreasing for it to reverse the other direction. All right, and it goes down tremendously from 1 to 2. All right, if there's been one back test, it's got a pretty good probability of pushing back down. If it's back tested twice, the 3rd time, it's got a pretty bad probability that it's going to reverse and turn down. In fact, there's a pretty high probability that it is going to push through. Of course, there is a probability that it does reverse again, but it's lower, right? This is just a game of probabilities. All right, so we came up here to 34.24, and as we can see, first off, we had one very strong candle push us up through. All right, a high volume candle. We're just about to enter into the market open here at 9 o'clock. So we had one very strong candle push through. All right, and the key fundamental thing here is that we back tested 34.24. All right, where 34.24 originally, was resistance to the upside, it now has become support. All right, so when I'm trading supply and demand, 9 times out of 10, I am always looking for the back test. All right, I'm never taking the initial move through. All right, liquidity, the market hunts for liquidity. So 9 times out of 10, there's going to be a back test. And so I'm always hunting for the back test. And so if I was looking for a failure of 34.24, what I would have done is I would have kind of waited for us to fail to back test and maybe get a couple of, attempts through. All right, and then refail again to the downside. All right, and so while the thought process I think was technically correct, all right, he was looking for a key area that had been back tested before. The issue is that it had already been back tested so many times, all right, once here and then once back here, that there was a good probability that it was going to bust through at this point, especially since we were on a bullish move to the upside. Now let's pull up the Underground Scalper and see if we got any sells painted here on gold. All right, so if we look at the Underground Scalper, all right, first we got our buy down here. Now the Underground Scalper is the primary indicator that we use instead of our community. It's a proprietary indicator, all right, that we create. All right, so looking down here, we had a buy given down here, so where we crossed the main line here, we crossed, we were holding above VWAP, VWAP's pointed up. All right, we held across this the entire time. All right, and then from here at 34.24, although we were in the supply cloud up here, right, because this indicator is based upon supply and demand, we did not have any further confluence that would allow us to push back down. Instead, we just kept on going up. All right, so really quickly, a couple of things to summarize. Number one, if price has already back tested a previous zone more than 1 or 2 times, the probability is significantly lower that it's going to reverse from there. Now, a lot of times I do look for double tops and even sometimes triple tops, but again, triple tops are going to have the least likely probability of reversing since it's already been back tested twice. So the market's attempt to get that liquidity from the upside has already been exhausted and likely already been pulled out. So now there's a good probability that it is going to bust through like we did in that trade, and it gave us a breakout. Number two, make sure that the zone is a quality zone, all right? So inside of our community, we have a testing system that we use to determine if a supply or demand zone is quality. Looking at gold during those scenarios, there was not really any quality supply zone that was built at the upper end. Volume had moved very clearly through those areas. There was not a ton of resistance. There were big wicks, all right? So it was already a very weak supply area. And number three, make sure that you have the right context. All right, when it comes to the market as a whole, you have to be aware of what direction that we're moving, and you have to be aware of the general patterns that the market takes when it's bullish or when it's bearish. Well, guys, that's it for this trade review. If this is something that you found helpful, that you were interested in, all right, if you're interested in trading supply and demand when it comes to futures, that's primarily how I am a full-time day trader. Make sure you click down below. Our Discord link is down there, or our Discord link is up here for you to be able to click into, or just reach out to us. And again, our Discord community is totally free to join, and you can see the wins of our indicator and the wins of our community. All right, and you can follow along as we trade futures. All right, and so if this helped you, give it a like and subscribe down below in this video. Comment too if you have any other questions about supply and demand trading. Thank you guys so much for checking out Black Gold Trading today, and we will see you in the next video. Bye for now.